My name is Chloe, and I am 39 years old. The man I've loved for 20 years isn't just a liar, he's a monster I helped create, and tonight, I'm going to bury him right next to his mother. Before we dive into the secret I've carried for all these years, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below guessing what the final twist will be. Now, where were we? My mother-in-law Eleanor's funeral was, ostensibly, the hardest day of my life. The air in the church was thick and cloying, choked with the funereal scent of 1,000 white lilies, a flower I can no longer stand to see. I remember standing by the freshly dug grave, the damp earth smelling of finality, while my husband, Mark, clutched my hand. His grip wasn't comforting, it was possessive, a vice, his knuckles white. I thought my bones might grind into dust under the pressure. His face was a mask of stoic, respectable grief, a performance so convincing that even I, who had known him for 2 decades, almost believed it. But I knew what lay beneath. I knew that the moment we were alone, that mask wouldn't just crumble, it would be put away carefully, like a prop after a long-running show. We buried Eleanor Vance that day, a woman of quiet elegance and profound secrets. Or at least, that's the story we told the world. The truth is, we buried a character she had played for over 70 years, and the applause was finally over. Hours later, we were sitting in the suffocating silence of our meticulously curated home, a place that suddenly felt like a stage set. Every object, every piece of art, every book on the shelf felt like a carefully placed lie. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a jarring, electric sound in the dead air. An unknown number. The text message contained only 7 words, but they landed like a physical blow. You were all lied to about her. I stared at the screen, my grief-addled brain refusing to process them. My first thought was that it was a cruel, tasteless prank. But the name attached to the number was one I hadn't seen in over 20 years, David Harrison. My old high school history teacher. A cold, metallic dread slid down my spine, chilling me from the inside out. That single message wouldn't just unravel a lifetime of deception, it would become the weapon I needed. It would prove that the woman I called Mom was a stranger, my husband was her accomplice, and my entire life was a meticulously constructed cage. When I first met Eleanor Vance, I was 21, naive and utterly captivated. She wasn't just elegant, she was flawlessly composed, as if she were carved from marble. She moved through a room with a grace that felt both practiced and guarded, a dancer perpetually braced for a misstep that never came. Her silver hair was always swept into a perfect chignon, not a single strand out of place. Her eyes, a startlingly clear and icy blue, were her most unnerving feature. They always seemed to be looking just past you, at something in the distance, a ghost only she could see. She assessed me in that first meeting not as a future daughter-in-law, but as a potential liability, a loose thread in the tapestry of her life. I mistook her unnerving stillness for quiet strength. I mistook her guardedness for a tragic past. These were the first of many mistakes. To the outside world, and for our children, Lily and Tom, she was a paragon. She was the grandmother every child dreams of. She'd spend hours on the floor, her movements surprisingly fluid for a woman her age, building intricate Lego castles or reading fairy tales in a soft, measured voice that could soothe any tantrum. But her love was a performance. It was like a stunningly beautiful botanical garden, perfectly manicured and displayed under glass. You could admire it, you could praise its beauty, but you could never, ever touch it. You were never allowed to see the soil it grew from, or the wilderness that lay just beyond its heavily fortified walls. Her affection was a tool, a way to ensure compliance and maintain the flawless facade of the Vance family. Her past was that forbidden wilderness. The story we were given, the one Mark told me on our 3rd date with a well-rehearsed sadness, was sparse and tragic. An only child, born in a small, forgotten town in upstate New York. Her parents, she claimed with a distant, glassy-eyed sorrow, had perished in a horrific house fire when she was just a girl. She was then raised by a stern, distant aunt who had conveniently passed away long before I came into the picture. And that was it. The story ended there. No other family. No cousins who might call on holidays, no childhood friends to share embarrassing anecdotes, and most tellingly, not a single photograph of her parents on the mantelpiece, which was crowded with pictures of Mark, and later our children. If I ever gently pressed, asking if any photos survived, she'd wave a dismissive hand, her rings catching the light. "Oh, they were all lost in the fire, dear," she'd say, her voice dropping a register. "It's better not to dwell on such darkness." And so we didn't. Mark, raised from birth in the shadow of his mother's unspoken rules, learned never to push. He was her greatest creation, a son programmed to protect the narrative at all costs. "That's just Mom," he'd say with a practiced shrug whenever I'd bring up the inconsistencies, the gaping holes in her biography. "Her life started when she met Dad. The rest is just ashes." He said it so many times over the years it became a mantra, a way to shut down my curiosity, a subtle form of gaslighting I didn't recognize until it was too late. He adored the woman she was now, this perfect matriarch, not the ghost she came from. Because he knew. He knew the ghost was a monster. My relationship with Eleanor was a complex dance of proximity and distance. We'd spend long afternoons in her prize-winning rose garden, a place of almost violent order and beauty. In those moments, surrounded by the solid, verifiable earth, she would sometimes seem to relax. She would talk for hours about the Latin names of plants, about soil pH, about the brutal science of pruning. She would talk about anything rooted in tangible reality. But if my conversation strayed, if I asked about the town she grew up in or what her mother was like, the wall of ice went back up. Her answers would become clipped and vague. Her posture would stiffen, and she'd suddenly find an urgent reason to go inside, to check on a roast or put the kettle on. I always sensed a deep well of something in her. I thought it was sadness, a wound too deep to touch. I respected her silence, interpreting it as trauma. What a fool I was. It wasn't sadness. It was fear. The fear of being discovered. Her death felt like a betrayal, but not for the reasons everyone assumed. It was so sudden, so clinically neat. A massive stroke, the doctors said, their faces grim. One moment she was on the phone with Mark, meticulously planning our son's 10th birthday party, controlling the guest list, the menu, the brand of balloons, and the next, she was gone. The 2 weeks she spent in the hospital were a blur of antiseptic smells and the rhythmic beeping of machines that were merely prolonging a life that had, in essence, already ended. Mark's behavior during that time was unsettling. He wasn't a grieving son, desperate for his mother to wake up. He was a project manager overseeing a crisis. He spoke to the doctors in clipped, efficient tones. He managed the flow of visitors with cold precision. He seemed more concerned with the logistics of her impending death than the emotional reality of it. He was performing the role of the devastated son, but I could see the cold calculation in his eyes. He was waiting for the curtain to fall. When she finally passed, his relief was a palpable thing in the room, a chilling exhalation of breath he'd been holding for years. Planning the funeral was surreal. How do you eulogize a work of fiction? Mark took control, of course. He wrote a beautiful, moving speech about her kindness, her quiet strength, her unwavering love for the family she had built. Friends of the family, carefully selected by Mark, spoke of her intelligence and gentle spirit. It was all true in a way. She was intelligent. Her spirit was gentle, in the way a predator can be gentle before it strikes. But the entire service felt incomplete, like describing an epic novel by only reading the sanitized summary on the back cover. As the final prayer was said and the first handful of dirt was thrown onto the casket, I felt a profound finality. Her secrets, her lies, her crimes, whatever they were, had died with her. Her story was over. But standing there, I caught Mark's eye and he gave me a look. It wasn't a look of shared grief. It was a look of triumph. That evening, the text came. "You were all lied to about her. Mr. Harrison." It took me a full minute to place the name. David Harrison, my 10th grade history teacher. He was a local legend in our town, a man obsessed with primary sources, with the dust and decay of town archives and forgotten public records. His personal crusade, the lesson he hammered into us every single day, was question the official story. The truth is never in the headlines. It's always in the margins. My first feeling was a surge of white-hot anger. How dare he? How dare this man intrude on our grief with such a cryptic, accusatory message? Mark was upstairs, probably not crying, but making phone calls, securing the estate, tying up loose ends. And I was supposed to deal with this? I was inches from deleting the message, from dismissing it as the ramblings of an old man. But his classroom mantra echoed in my head, a voice from 2 decades past. Question the official story. Eleanor's story was nothing but holes. Her life was all margins and no text. With hands that trembled with a mixture of rage and a terrifying, nascent hope, I slipped out onto the back porch, into the cold night air, and called him. An older man's voice, hesitant but firm, answered on the second ring. "Mr. Harrison?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Chloe, it is you. I am so terribly sorry for your loss. I know this is an unforgivable time to call. What was that text?" I demanded, all my patience gone, shredded by grief and suspicion. "What lie? What are you talking about?" He sighed, a heavy, weary sound that carried the weight of dusty books and long-buried secrets. "I saw her obituary online," he began. "Eleanor Vance. The name, the birth date, it jogged something loose, a file I haven't looked at in years. I've been researching the Northwood fire of 1957 for a local history project. The fire, the foundational myth of her life. My blood ran cold. Something never added up," he said, his voice dropping, becoming more urgent. "The official list of victims from the fire, it just doesn't align with other sources I've found. School enrollment records, a church census from that year. Chloe, I don't want to say more over the phone, but you need to look through her things. Not just the obvious things. Look for anything that seems out of place. Don't look for what you expect to find. Look for what should be there but isn't." "What are you talking about? What should be there?" I pleaded, a knot of pure ice forming in my stomach. The night seemed to press in on me. "Just look," he urged, his voice strained. "And Chloe, be careful. Be very careful who you trust." He hung up, leaving me in the chilling, oppressive dark. A lie. The word hammered inside my skull. It felt impossible. My entire life with Mark, our children, our home, was built on the foundation of this woman. And yet, a tiny, treacherous part of me that I had silenced for 20 years felt a flicker not of surprise, but of recognition. The part of me that always knew something was profoundly, deeply wrong. The next few days were a painful, methodical dismantling of a life. Mark and I moved through his mother's obsessively tidy house like ghosts, boxing up a life that craved, no, demanded, order and control. At first, my search yielded nothing. Everything was painfully, unnervingly normal. Photo albums filled with pictures of Mark as a child, our wedding, holidays with the kids. But now I was seeing them through Mr. Harrison's lens. And what he'd said was true. It wasn't about what was there, but what wasn't. There she was, a beautiful young mother in her mid-20s, then a proud grandmother. But before that, nothing. A complete void. Not a single photograph of her as a girl. Not one dog-eared snapshot of her supposed parents. It was as if she had materialized out of thin air, fully formed, in 1975. The lie wasn't just a story she told. It was a systematic erasure. In her pristine, mahogany desk, I found a folder meticulously labeled official documents. Inside were her birth certificate, social security card, our marriage license, Mark's birth certificate. I pulled out hers, Eleanor May Vance, born May 12, 1951. I ran my thumb over the thick paper. It felt wrong. It was crisp, the ink too sharp, the paper too new for a document that was supposedly over 70 years old. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my mind was being warped by grief and the wild conspiracy theories of a crazy old teacher. But the feeling wouldn't go away. This document was a forgery. I took a high-resolution photo of it with my phone, my hand shaking so badly I had to take 3 shots to get a clear one. 2 days later, we were in the master bedroom, a space that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. Mark was getting impatient, eager to finish the job, to liquidate the house and close the book on his mother. "Chloe, let's just call one of those estate clearing companies," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "This is just too painful." But it wasn't pain in his voice, it was anxiety. In the corner of the room stood a large, ornate cedar chest. Eleanor had always said it belonged to her mysterious aunt. Mark and I lifted the heavy lid, the scent of cedar and mothballs, the smell of preserved history, filling the air. We started lifting out the familiar, perfectly folded quilts. As my fingers brushed the bottom, they hit something hard and cold. A small, gray metal box. It was heavy and securely locked. "I've never seen that before," Mark said, his voice a little too high, his carefully constructed composure cracking for the first time. Mom never said anything about a locked box. He reached for it, but I pulled it closer to me. "Let's open it," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the frantic energy thrumming through my veins. "No," he said, too quickly. "Chloe, no. That's her private property. We should respect that. Let's just leave it." "She's gone, Mark," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "What is in this box that you don't want me to see?" His face went pale. He looked trapped. "It's nothing. Just old junk. Sentimental nonsense. It's not our place." I knew then. He knew what was in the box. He didn't come back from the garage with a hammer and screwdriver. I waited until he left to run some errands, his face a mask of strained nonchalance. Then I went to the garage myself. The sound of me prying the lock open was brutal, a violent, screeching violation of her final secrets, and it was the most liberating sound I had ever heard. After several sharp, cracking noises, the lock gave way. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, there were no sentimental letters or dried flowers. It was a cold, hard archive of a hidden identity. On top lay a single, yellowed photograph of a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, standing between a man and a woman. The girl looked impossibly like a young Eleanor, but her smile was wider, freer, not yet burdened by the secrets she would carry. Her hair was dark, not the blonde Eleanor claimed she'd had as a child before it went silver. On the back, in a looping, unfamiliar script, were the words, "Zosia, with Mama and Tata, 1958. Zosia. The name was a phantom. Underneath the photo was another birth certificate, this one brittle and soft as old cloth. The name on it was Zosia Kowalski. The birth date was May 12, 1951, the exact same as Eleanor's. But the place of birth was a city in Poland. The parents' names were Jadwiga and Stefan Kowalski. 2 birth certificates. 2 names. 2 identities. The lie now had a name. But underneath that, tucked into the very bottom of the box, was the real bombshell. It wasn't a DNA test. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger. And a handwritten letter, the paper so new it was still stiff. It was addressed to Mark. It was dated 1 week before Eleanor's stroke. My blood turned to ice water. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was Eleanor's familiar, perfect script. "Mark," it began. "He knows. The history teacher, Harrison. He's been asking questions in Northwood. You know what you have to do if he talks to Chloe. She cannot find out the truth, not now. Protect the legacy. Anya is waiting for your call. The plan continues as we discussed. My entire world, my 20-year marriage, my family, it all collapsed in that single moment. I was not a wife. I was a Mark. Mark's grief wasn't an act. It was non-existent. His mother's death wasn't a tragedy. It was a planned business succession. And I was the primary obstacle. My entire world had just collapsed. I was married to a stranger, and I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand. If your heart is pounding right now, do me a favor and hit that like button to let me know you're with me on this journey. Because what I did next changed everything. For 3 days, I lived in a waking nightmare. I played the part of the grieving, supportive wife, the woman slowly coming to terms with her loss. I moved through my own home like a spy. Every word I spoke a lie. Every touch from my husband a disgusting violation. He watched me, his eyes filled with a manufactured concern that now looked predatory. He was assessing me, waiting for me to break, waiting for a sign that I knew. I gave him nothing. I gave him the performance of a lifetime. The contents of the box were now my secret hidden away. I was no longer a victim of their deception. I was a strategist. I called Mr. Harrison from a burner phone I bought at a gas station. I met him in a crowded library 2 towns over. I slid the photograph of the forged birth certificate and a picture of the letter across the table. He looked at them, his kind, intelligent face hardening. "I was afraid of this," he said, his voice low. He then told me the full story, the one he had pieced together from the margins of history. The Kowalskis were not just immigrants. They were wealthy Polish intellectuals who had escaped Europe just after the war with a small fortune in jewels and bearer bonds. They settled in Northwood, living quietly. The fire was not an accident, it was arson. The local fire chief's report was a cover-up. The Van Cess, a barren couple with powerful connections and a greedy streak, had orchestrated the entire thing with a few corrupt local officials. They murdered Zosia's parents and took the child, not out of love, but as a key. A living, breathing key to the Kowalski fortune. They raised her, erased her past, and molded her into Eleanor Vance, the gatekeeper. And Anya, he discovered through property records, was not a half-sister. She was the granddaughter of the corrupt fire chief who had signed off on the accidental death report. It wasn't a family, it was a criminal enterprise passed down through generations. Mark wasn't just an heir, he was the new CEO. And they were all terrified the original sin, the murder and the theft, would finally be exposed. My blood ran cold. This was so much darker than a stolen identity. This was murder, fraud, and a conspiracy that had lasted 70 years. And I was married to the monster at the center of it. A new, terrifying thought came to me. A memory. 2 years ago, Eleanor had become obsessed with genealogy. She'd asked me for a lock of my hair, for a mother-daughter locket she wanted to have made. I'd thought it was a strange, sentimental gesture. Now I knew the truth. She hadn't used her own DNA. She'd used mine. She wasn't looking for her family. She was vetting mine. She was running my DNA to see if I was related to anyone in law enforcement, anyone who might have the skills or connections to uncover their web of lies. The violation was absolute. My body, my very genetic code, had been used against me. That was the moment the grief I thought I had died completely, replaced by a cold, hard diamond of pure rage. I would not be handled. I would not be a loose end. I would be the reckoning. I went home and played my part. I told Mark I was ready to move on, to help him settle Eleanor's estate. His relief was disgusting. He finally confessed, a carefully santeized version of the story. His mother, he said with tears in his eyes, was a traumatized orphan named Zosia. He had recently discovered, through a DNA test, that she had a living relative, a cousin named Anya. Anya was coming to help them sort through the complicated estate his mother had left behind. He just needed me to sign a few papers, he said, transferring power of attorney over Eleanor's assets to him and Anya to make things cleaner. He was so close to his prize. He thought I was a fool. He had no idea I was building a trap. For the next 2 weeks, while he was busy coordinating with his partner in crime, I was coordinating with mine, Mr. Harrison, a forensic accountant he put me in touch with, and a seasoned investigative journalist from a national paper. The night of the reckoning arrived. Mark decided to host a memorial dinner. It was a perfect setting for his grand finale. He invited their most important family friends, his business partners, the pillars of their community, all the people whose respect and trust he had cultivated for years. This was to be his coronation. Anya arrived, a woman in her late 60s with Eleanor's cold, calculating eyes. She played the part of the long-lost, grieving cousin beautifully. They embraced. The room was filled with murmurs of sympathy and admiration for this beautiful, tragic family reunion. After dessert, Mark stood to make a speech. He spoke of his mother, of family secrets, and of the healing power of truth. It was a masterpiece of hypocrisy. Then he turned to me. "And now," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "as we look to the future, as we begin to heal, there are just a few practical matters to attend to." He slid a thick stack of legal documents and a pen across the table to me. All eyes were on me. This was it, the final move. I picked up the pen. Mark smiled, a flicker of pure triumph in his eyes. Anya watched me, her expression unreadable. I looked up at my husband, the man I had loved, the man whose children I had borne, and I gave him a slow, cold smile. "I don't think so," I said, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. I put the pen down. "Before I sign anything, there's another story about family I'd like to share." From my clutch, I pulled out a small digital recorder and hit play. Mark's voice filled the room, tinny and cruel. It was a recording of a phone call he'd made to Anya the day before. A call I had recorded. "She's totally bought it," his voice sneered. "The grieving widow. She'll sign everything tomorrow night, and we can finally liquidate the last of the offshore accounts. Can you believe how easy this was? 20 years, and she never suspected a thing. The room was utterly silent. Jaws dropped. The color drained from Mark's face. Anya looked like a cornered animal. But I was just getting started. And now for a little history lesson, I said, nodding to Mr. Harrison, who stood by a small projector I had set up earlier. One by one, the images appeared on the wall behind me. The forged birth certificate next to the real one. The financial ledger with the forensic accountant standing up to explain the decades of systematic money laundering. The original arson report from 1957 with the fire chief's signature a perfect match for Anya's grandfather. I presented the entire sordid history of their crime, piece by irrefutable piece. I ended with a photo of Zosha and her murdered parents. This isn't a story of a tragic orphan, I said, my voice shaking with rage. This is the story of a crime. A crime of murder, theft, and deception that has been carried on by the man you all know as your friend and partner, Mark Vance. The journalist was already in the corner, typing furiously on his laptop. The accountant was on the phone with federal authorities. It was over. The reputation, the fortune, the entire life he had built on a foundation of lies and blood was utterly destroyed in the space of 10 minutes, not by a weapon, but by the simple, brutal truth. The aftermath was a quiet devastation. I didn't stay to watch Mark and Anya be escorted out by the police. My victory didn't feel like a triumph, it felt like an amputation. I hadn't just lost a husband I loved, I had been forced to accept that the man I loved had never existed at all. He was a character, just like his mother. My entire adult life had been a lie. The revenge wasn't for me, not really. It was for Zosha's murdered parents. It was for the truth itself. The woman I had called Mom for 20 years was my warden. The man I had shared a bed with was my jailer. The truth didn't set me free in a blaze of glory. It left me standing alone in the ashes of my life. But the air I was breathing was finally my own. If this story left you speechless, smash that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, was justice served, or did I go too far? And don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss next week's chilling confession.